Thomas Hartwell sat in the corner booth of the elegant downtown restaurant and adjusted the dark glasses that covered his perfectly healthy eyes. At 58 years old he had built an empire from nothing and accumulated more wealth than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But wealth had taught him a painful lesson about human nature. His late wife Catherine had loved him when they shared a tiny apartment above a hardware store. She had believed in him when his first business failed. She had held his hand through every struggle and never once asked what he could buy her. 3 years had passed since cancer took her and the emptiness in Thomas's heart had only grown deeper. His daughter Rachel meant well. She worried about him rattling around in that big house alone. She had convinced him to try meeting someone new and even set up a profile on one of those dating services for mature professionals. The responses had flooded in within hours. That's when Thomas got his idea. He would pretend to need help and see who stayed. See who offered genuine kindness rather than simply pursuing his money. He borrowed the white cane from a charity auction his company had sponsored and practiced walking with it until the movements looked natural. The first woman arrived precisely at noon. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Thomas listened as she approached and then walked right past him. He heard her speaking to the hostess in an irritated voice about being seated immediately because she had an important appointment afterward. When the hostess guided her to Thomas's booth, she slid into the seat across from him. Her perfume was overwhelming and expensive. "Thomas," she said. "I'm Veronica. It's nice to meet you." Thomas replied and extended his hand in the wrong direction deliberately. There was a pause. "Oh," Veronica said. Her voice had changed. "Your profile didn't mention that you had a disability." "Does it matter?" Thomas asked gently. Another pause and longer this time. "Well, I just think people should be honest about these things up front. I mean, it's a significant detail to leave out, don't you think?" Thomas smiled sadly. "I suppose some things are more significant than others." The lunch lasted exactly 23 minutes. Veronica checked her phone 4 times and made an excuse about a client emergency. She never asked Thomas if he needed help with the menu. She never offered to describe the restaurant to him. She simply left and Thomas heard her heels clicking rapidly toward the exit. The second date came 2 days later. Patricia arrived with a bright, cheerful voice that seemed practiced. She cooed over Thomas like he was a child and spoke slowly and loudly as if blindness affected hearing. "Isn't this wonderful?" she proclaimed. "I think it's so brave that you're out here dating. Really, it's so inspiring." Thomas winced. "I'm just having lunch." "Of course you are, sweetie. Of course. Now let me help you with everything. I'll just order for both of us, shall I? I know exactly what you need." She proceeded to order him a salad without asking what he wanted. When Thomas tried to reach for his water glass, she grabbed his hand. "Oh no, let me help you with that. You might spill." The lunch was suffocating. Patricia treated him like a project and an inspiration rather than a person. She talked endlessly about her volunteer work and how much she loved helping those less fortunate. Thomas was relieved when she finally left. 3 more dates followed over the next 2 weeks. Each woman reacted to his supposed blindness with either discomfort or false sympathy or barely concealed disappointment. By the time Thomas arranged to meet his 6th match, he was ready to give up on the whole experiment. Grace Winters had suggested they meet at a small cafe near the library instead of the fancy restaurants Thomas had been choosing. Her profile picture showed a woman with kind eyes and smile lines. She was 54 and worked as a school librarian. Her profile mentioned that she had a teenage son and enjoyed gardening and old movies. Thomas arrived early and took a seat at a small table by the window. He positioned his cane carefully and waited. Grace arrived exactly on time, carrying an armful of books that she was clearly returning to the library next door. She didn't notice Thomas at first and he watched as she juggled her load and tried to open the cafe door. One of the books slipped from her arms. Without thinking, Thomas stood up and started to move toward her. Then he remembered and stopped and fumbled with his cane. Grace had already retrieved the fallen book and made her way inside. She saw Thomas standing awkwardly in the middle of the cafe. "Thomas," she asked. "I'm Grace. Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. I was just..." He gestured vaguely. "Let me help you back to your table," she said, and her voice was gentle but matter of fact. She didn't grab him or coo at him. She simply offered her arm and let him set the pace as they walked the few steps back to his seat. "Thank you," Thomas said. Grace settled into the chair across from him and there was a comfortable silence. Then she said something that surprised him. I apologize for being slightly scattered. My son Daniel had a rough morning. He's 16 and everything feels like the end of the world at that age. Thomas smiled. I remember those years with my daughter. What happened? Oh, he's worried about his grades and whether he'll get into college. I keep telling him he's doing wonderfully but he puts so much pressure on himself. She paused. I'm sorry. I'm talking too much about myself. How has your week been? They talked and really talked for the first time in all of Thomas's staged dates. Grace asked him questions and actually listened to his answers. She told him about her students at the library and the joy of watching children discover books they loved. She mentioned her late husband briefly and how he had passed away when Daniel was only 8. It's been challenging, she admitted. Raising a teenage boy alone and working full-time. But Daniel is such a good kid. He helps around the house without being asked and he's so kind to other people. That matters more than any grade. When the server came, Grace read the entire menu out loud to Thomas without making a fuss about it. She described each item simply and asked what sounded good to him. It felt natural and respectful. During lunch, Grace knocked over her water glass and it splashed across the table. She jumped up apologizing and dabbing at the spreading puddle with napkins. Thomas instinctively reached out to help move the salt shaker out of the water's path. Grace noticed and her hand stilled for just a moment. But she didn't say anything. She simply smiled and continued cleaning up the spill. They talked for 2 hours and Thomas forgot he was supposed to be testing anyone. Grace was interesting and warm and funny in a gentle self-deprecating way. She asked him about his work and seemed genuinely interested in the details of running a business. She shared stories about teaching Daniel to drive and attending his school concerts and trying to make every dollar stretch a little further. I'm sorry, she said eventually. I should let you go. I'm sure you have much more important things to do than listen to me ramble about grocery shopping and parent-teacher conferences. Actually, Thomas said slowly, and this has been the most enjoyable afternoon I've had in a very long time. Grace's smile was radiant. I've enjoyed it too. Would you like to do this again sometime? Very much, Thomas said. As they prepared to leave, Grace gathered her things and then turned to Thomas. Do you need me to call a car for you or would you like company walking to wherever you're headed? It was such a simple question asked with such natural kindness that Thomas felt something crack in his chest. This woman with her armload of library books and her teenager at home and her modest librarian's salary had treated him with more genuine care than anyone else he'd met. Grace, he said quietly, and I need to tell you something. She waited impatient. Thomas reached up and slowly removed the dark glasses. I'm not blind. Grace's eyes widened. She looked at him and then at the cane and then back at his face. He expected anger or hurt or shock. Instead, her expression softened into something like understanding. Why? She asked simply. Thomas explained everything. The parade of women who had reacted to his supposed disability with discomfort or condescension. His need to find someone who would see him as a person rather than a bank account. His loneliness since Catherine died and his fear of being valued only for his wealth. When he finished, Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, and I lost my husband to a sudden heart attack. One day he was here and the next he was gone. It taught me that life is too short for pretending to be anything other than who we are. She picked up her books and Thomas's heart sank. She was leaving. He had ruined everything. But Grace turned back to him. Thomas, I understand why you did this. I do. Grief makes us do strange things and fear of being hurt again makes us put up walls. But if we're going to see each other again, and I hope we are, then we need to promise to be honest. No more tests. No more pretending. Just two people who have lived long enough to know that genuine connection is rare and precious. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Grace said gently. Just be yourself. That's all any of us really wants. They walked out of the cafe together into the autumn sunshine. Thomas carried Grace's stack of library books and she looped her arm through his. Not because he needed guidance but simply because it felt natural. Can I tell you something? Grace said. When you reached for that salt shaker after I spilled my water, I suspected you weren't really blind. But I also saw how lonely you looked when I first walked in. How hungry you were for real conversation. And I thought to myself that whatever your reason for pretending it came from a place of pain. So I decided to just be kind regardless. Thomas stopped walking. You knew. I suspected, Grace corrected. But it didn't change how I felt about talking with you. You're interesting and thoughtful, and you actually listened when I talked about Daniel. Do you know how rare that is? Thomas realized in that moment that he had been testing the wrong thing. Grace had passed not because she had been fooled by his act, but because she had chosen kindness anyway. She had seen through his defenses and responded with compassion rather than judgment. My daughter is going to love you, Thomas said. Grace laughed, and it was a warm, wonderful sound. Let's start with a second date before we start planning family dinners. They exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet again that weekend. As Thomas watched Grace walk toward the library with her books, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 long years. He felt hope. The leaves were turning gold and red in the trees overhead. Somewhere a church bell chimed the hour. Thomas folded up the white cane he would never use again and smiled. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another person is simple kindness without judgment or expectation of reward. Grace had given him that gift, and in return he would offer her honesty and respect, and if she would have it, the steady, faithful love of a man who had finally learned what truly mattered.